Hello, all you fellow horror hounds. Welcome to Crypt Finder. My name is Brian, and I am going to be guiding you through the shadowy corridors of lost and abandoned horror films. I'll be your sort of horror movie host, in a way. I'll be doing reviews, rankings, and retrospectives on this channel, and that's actually where I want to start off today. This is the inaugural episode of a series I'm going to be doing on, well, it's a subgenre of horror that's been lost in the shadows way too long, and that is made-for-TV horror movies. Now, these weren't just films. They're sort of relics of a bygone era, but they are fantastic and interesting pieces of film history. But before we get to the particular film I'm going to be discussing, I thought it was important to talk about what made-for-TV movies actually were and how they got started. So, okay, let's rewind the clock all the way back to 1969. Why that year, right? You might be wondering. It's because that was when the ABC Movie of the Week first burst upon the scene. I mean, there had been original movies before, other content that had been created specifically just for television. But this was the first time it became a juggernaut, a huge bona fide hit. And of course, what happened? All the other networks jumped on board and decided to start creating original movies as well. This resulted in some of the most original and daring program that had ever been created for television before. You had actors who maybe their time on the silver screen had come to an end, or you just had solid veteran TV actors, and suddenly they were cast in roles like you have never seen before. So it was a real kick for the audience to see them interpret these characters in very unique ways, and for them, I'm sure it was really interesting to sort of spread their wings a little bit and really begin to explore some of their acting chops in a way that they hadn't been allowed to do before. All of these actors and wonderful directors and producers and writers came together and they were doing something it had never really been done before. They started to push the boundaries of what could be done on television, so it became a little edgier, just a little bit darker than they had ever explored before. Now, I do want to just warn you, this was the dark ages of the 1970s. So things were a little bit different, right? There were no streaming services. There was no 4K Ultras, no Blu-rays, no DVDs, no VHS tapes. There was nothing. What you would do is you would take a look in the newspaper, or if you were lucky, you got the TV guide. You would go through and you would sort of mentally put a little check in anything that you wanted to watch, and you needed to be home on that specific evening to watch it, or you didn't see it at all. Maybe it would be rebroadcast in the summer. Sometimes they sort of would find their way into late night fodder and you could catch them occasionally on the weekends. But for the most part, you knew if you didn't watch it at the time, you didn't see it. And that meant that if you were interested, you had to be there. And the filmmakers were pretty unique. It was a hodgepodge. Sometimes these original movies were romance, sometimes westerns, sci-fi, mystery, thrillers, horror. You got a little bit of everything. And all of them ended up being pretty interesting. So why did these movies work at all? Well, they were masters of the slow burn. They perfected the art of it was about creating mood. It was about creating suspense and atmosphere, whereas big screen films had to kind of grab you by the throat and couldn't let go. These movies could sort of sit back, they could simmer, and let you really become immersed in the suspense and the dread of the moment. It wasn't about any sort of flash, it was about the storytelling. Ultimately, revisiting some of these movies, it's a way of taking a look at some of the groundbreaking beginnings and how certain tropes that have now evolved into becoming sort of standard on the big screen, how a lot of those things got started. So, a bit of a warning here. If you are used to flashy horror films, there's a lot of jump scares, there's a lot of quick cuts, and a big budget. Yeah, this is going to be a bit of a slog for you to get through. But I do think it's worth your time and effort to go in to take a look at. Yes, the movies were paced a lot differently, especially TV movies back in the 1970s, but there's still fascinating stories that really deserve to be rediscovered. Frankly, it is a freaking treasure trove of really compelling, interesting movies with great powerhouse performances. A lot of the directors who made these movies, they've gone on to become very famous directors. You had top-notch writers as well. So everybody behind and in front of the camera definitely made this a trip that, yeah, you want to take. Because a lot of these movies have kind of started to fade away now, it's harder to see them. There actually is a made-for-TV channel on YouTube, and a lot of these have been uploaded to YouTube. You can find them and watch them for free. Not all of them. A few studios here and there, some niche distributors have created some remastered versions, and they're really nice and beautiful. If not, you could certainly probably find them on DVD, even if it's a low quality example of it. You can still track them down. You had a real dynamic shift in the way that movies were being made. By the time you got into the late 60s and early 1970s, if you've seen Sam Peckinpah's Western The Wild Bunch, for example, that was a really good example of suddenly you could see like how different a Western could be, how violent a Western could be. But you also had other examples, Bonnie and Clyde, Five Easy Pieces, Easy Rider, even The Graduate, very different approaches to filmmaking. And some of it was more experimental in nature. And you can see some of that reflected in some of the made-for-TV movies. These films made just for the small screen could really begin to push the boundaries. They ended up making things that were a lot more unsettling for the audiences than they had ever experienced before. And so, okay, enough of all this backstory. I'm going to actually take you through the movie that we're going to be discussing today from 1974. It was. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. That's the alarm going off. It means that one of the victims in the torture chamber, they're trying to escape. I'll I'll be right back. Ooh, good night, nurse. I'm so sorry. I really apologize to all of you. Thank you for holding on. Don't worry. We got him. We released the hounds. So anyway, where was I? Oh yeah, the movie. The movie that we're talking about is from 1974. It is The Stranger Within. This movie stars Barbara Eden, George Grizzard, David Doyle, and Joyce Van Patten, and it is a wonderful film. So I'm going to dive in there and talk a little bit about it, and hopefully, as we reach the end, you'll be really intrigued and too curious to let it go, and you'll go and actually seek it out and give a watch. People often complain about how overwrought this movie is and the acting is way on the melodrama side. I completely disagree. I don't know what movie they're watching because this is a really, really interesting movie. And Barbara Eden, by the way, she completely sheds all traces of her I Dream of Jeannie role and even some of the other comedic type parts she had earlier in her career. Here, she gives a real powerhouse performance. Barbara Eden plays an artist named Anne Collins who suddenly, unexpectedly, finds herself pregnant, even though her husband David had a vasectomy 3 years prior to this. George Grizzard plays her husband, and it's interesting that, of course, he begins to suspect that she had an affair, whereas she denies that. He has doubts and suspicions. The script doesn't really land on one side or the other. It allows both of these characters to experience everything that they're feeling and have that really play out within the film. As the pregnancy continues at a very accelerated pace, Anne begins to exhibit some very strange behavior. She's drinking coffee constantly. She's salting all of her food. She becomes hypersensitive to light and to sound. She begins to develop almost superhuman abilities. And even stranger for her friends, she becomes very cold. She becomes distant. She begins to not do or enjoy any of the things that she did before. Those around her become more and more concerned as her behavior becomes more erratic. The unborn child seems to exude some sort of influence over Anne. And it's interesting within this movie. Clocks are represented a lot. It's interesting. They have a lot of clocks in their home, and the little auditory cues of the ticking is used throughout as an effect in this film. I think it's probably indicating that certainly, yes, her biological clock was ticking, but even more so, there's a sense of not only her pregnancy becoming extremely advanced very quickly, but also a sense of that time is quickly running out. Richard Matheson wrote the screenplay based on his novella, and he was a master storyteller. In case you don't recognize the name, he wrote the novel I Am Legend. He also penned a lot of the more famous Twilight Zone episodes, and here he does a really nice job of sort of grounding this story in a sense of realism that maybe people had not seen before. And I say that because it's not going to really raise a lot of eyebrows today, but at the time that this movie was made, the subject of abortion was not discussed in any way whatsoever. And the movie does a really nice job of handling that in a very frank way. So he was trying to imbue as much realism as possible into the film, and it shows. The Stranger Within is clearly an example of the pregnancy horror subgenre, where certainly there's going to be echoes of Rosemary's Baby in this, and even a little bit later on in this particular decade, when David Cronenberg in 1979 made The Brood, I think you will see some indication of that. Remember also that this film came out in 1974, so it was just a year after The Exorcist had premiered. So any movie that had to do with possession as a theme at all, it was hot property. But I don't want to steer you down the wrong road. This doesn't devolve into demonic territory whatsoever. It's actually a little bit more of an interesting, subtle approach. You're not going to see big special effects. Everything is very quiet, very subdued. A lens flare might be the most special effect that you're going to get, but it's still well worth your time to check this one out. I can imagine a lot of people right now might think, okay, well, sounds like a ripoff of Rosemary's Baby. Or they'll go and watch it and come back and say, a year after The Exorcist, is this the best that TV really had to offer? And I want to just offer a little bit of warning there. So Matheson's original novella, which was called Trespass, by the way, was published in 1953, so long before Ira Levin published Rosemary's Baby or William Peter Blatty published The Exorcist. I've read both those books. They're fantastic novels. They were, of course, made into absolutely phenomenal films. But I don't want you to be too harsh on Matheson's film. He's sort of grandfathered in. So it's not that it was a direct copy of anything else. It really sets out to be its own thing. It is completely original in its concept and in its execution. Okay, well, that's it. I really hope you go and give it a watch. Again, the movie is The Stranger Within, starring Barbara Eden. I will tell you now, there are no jump scares in this movie. Do not expect anything flashy like that at all. This is all pure psychological horror. It is about the slow unraveling of Anne's mind and her family and friends as they begin to sort of grapple with the results of what's happening to her in her pregnancy. So again, I really hope you give it a watch. Let me know down in the comments what you think about it. Please hit the like and subscribe button. That just will update you and let you know when a new video drops. And until next time, stay curious and stay scared.